Yes, I'm scared. But this is like a competition for me, and I'm ready to go on that 100-meter run. I won't run it in 9.9 like I used to, or my 100-yard dash, not 100 meters, but I will get through it, and as I go along, I'll get stronger and stronger, and won't stutter for you. But not making fun of only myself. I am very honored, and I can't tell you how honored I am to be here with this group of people and to be part of this meeting. And I want to extend my thanks to the program committee for asking me to be here. Christian, thank you so very much. Sonia, I know you're around here somewhere. I can't see you, but thank you so much for all the help you've given me. And Horst Giesen, thank you so much for what you have done to make this possible. And there is a gentleman named Brandon. He's just a helper, but he communicated me almost as much as Sonia did. So let's get started. I've got a lot to say and only a short period of time to say it. This is my family right here. And if you look closely, you see my oldest son over here, his wife Joanna Jackson, who I'm told last night was going to grow another 6 inches. Look over here. He's going to grow another 6 inches. My granddaughter Jenna, all belong to Jason, Joanna, Jackson, Jenna, the 4 J's. And this is our youngest son, Michael, his wife, Anna. Oh, yeah, look at those eyes. Yeah, he's the guy. He's the guy. He reminds me so much of myself when I was that age. And this is our 3rd son right here. And this is Kobe. And we love Kobe dearly. The focus of what I want to say today is very pertinent to this slide. A family should be physically active together. We can talk about policy development, I think, which is very important, not to take anything away from that, but it begins at home with our family. So think about that as we go through today with this presentation. These will be the 3 areas I'll talk about: major preventable chronic diseases, physical activity, exercise, and health, and what is in the future for our children. Because for me, as you saw, I not only have 2 sons and 2 daughter-in-laws, 2 daughters, and 3, but I have 3 grandchildren, and they're very important to me, and their health is very important to me. If we look at global causes of death between 1990 and 2017, we see very clearly that we have reduced the communicable kinds of diseases. But as we have reduced the communicable, the non-communicable portion has grown. And that's where we are making our focus right now. I'm going to knock that over. Okay. Let's move on. I like to put this list up because I actually started working in chronic diseases 35 years ago. But about 20 years ago, a gentleman named Frank Booth handed me this list and said, "Larry, I can tell you right now, this is what we know about chronic disease, and where exercise is certainly important." I'm not going to show you the whole list, but this is about 18 or so. That list has grown to 65 to 70, where we know that physical activity is very important in reducing the risk as well as the severity of these different kinds of conditions. I'm going to show you a series of slides over the next 4 slides, and there's a hidden trend, and I want to see if you can get that. So yes, there is going to be an exam, a quiz, and you're going to have to participate. We've talked about interaction. We are going to have interaction in the middle of Larry's presentation. Just to give you a brief description of what's going on here, the 4 countries: United States, Brazil, Germany, and China. The blue represents 2002, the red 2010, and what will be in 2030, or the estimates from WHO and those that we could glean from the China database. And what we see here with the United States is that what we see here with the United States is the trend is for certainly an increase in the individuals with cardiovascular disease. But it's not only in the United States. We see that in Brazil, in Germany, and also in China. All right? Now, you need to be looking for that trend here. There's a trend. If we look now, take the same schematic here, take the same schematic for type 2 diabetes, we see the same trend for type 2 diabetes. And just a small point, if we remember when I was growing up in the 50s, yes, Larry Durstine grew up in the 50s and the 60s, we didn't call it type 2 diabetes, we called it adult onset diabetes. We don't call it that anymore because it's happening in our children. And I'll get to that in a few minutes. And so we see the same trends here. If we look at obesity, we see the same trends happening in obesity. Keep your eye open for that trend that I'm going to quiz you about in just a moment. And so if we look at cancer, we see a similar trend for cancer in these different countries right here. Now, the question is, what is that hidden trend? It's not hidden, it's right there in front of you. Can you see what that trend is? Who has an idea? Okay, I do. I know what that idea is, and it's right here. I don't know what's happening in Germany, but it's something good. Because the trend in Germany, whether it's cardiovascular disease, diabetes, maybe not so much in obesity, but in cancer, the trend is for less. I presented this information about 3 years or so ago in Jakarta with a group of people from around the world. And I said, I'm not really sure what's happening in Germany, but I want some of their action. I want to be in Germany. And it just so happened that Guten Dahl-Tepper, who is the, I had to write this down so I could say it right. She is the vice president for the German Olympic Federation now. She met with me in a question and answer period, and she goes, Larry, there are a lot of things that go into this. Why perhaps we don't have as much prediction risk for disease? And I said, well, what's the most important? She goes, we still require, not only do we require PE, but we make it happen from K through 12 or K through high school. They still require it. Well, that made me think, but what's going on in the United States? And I had a really good friend, Kim Graber, who a year or so ago I talked to, almost a year and a half ago, and I said, what's going on? You have a handle on this. And she gave me one of her slides, and she said, in the United States, only one state, the state of Illinois and the District of Columbia, meet the national recommendations for physical education in our public schools. Only one state. Well, I'm in the great state of South Carolina. We don't meet those recommendations. And why? Because physical education is one of the first things in public schools that's done away with when you start to run out of money. And so my point is that we need to be thinking about what our children are doing. So let's look a little more at what our children are doing. My data isn't exactly as Philip had, but it's very close, Philip. In the United States right now, we're the best. We're the fattest. I'm not proud of that. I'm a very competitive guy. Last night I told a group of new friends I not only ran a 900-yard dash, but I also ran a 2:46 marathon. That's pretty difficult to do well in two different such events. Not bragging, my point is I am competitive, and I am so disappointed when I look at this number for both our men and our women, our boys and girls growing up. You can look down through here if you're from the Netherlands, if you're from Germany, you can see where you guys fit into that, and I'd rather be down here. Maybe I read this graph wrong. Maybe number 1 is down here, and number 15 is up here. Well, as long as we see what's happening in terms of being overweight or obese with our children, we look at what's happening with diabetes in the United States since 2004. Philip gave us some nice statistics a few minutes ago in what's happening in the last 40 years with obesity, but what's happening with type 2 diabetes? Again, we no longer call it adult onset diabetes because we see this in boys and girls, and we see that it rises. Especially look at what's happening to our young women. It's rising. But the same thing, but not to the same extent, we see that rise happening here. And this is data reported in 2017 from the New England Journal of Medicine by Beth Mayer Davis in Chapel Hill, North Carolina. Well, this one is one that really concerns me the most. If we look at childhood cancer rates, and this is not any particular cancer, it's a multitude of cancers. And what we see is that from 2000 to 2015, the incidence rates continue to climb. The incidence rates continue to climb. These are actual values over here. But if we look at mortality rates with our kids, I can jump up and down and I can say, yes, yes, look what we're doing to mortality rates. As they're going up here, once we make the diagnosis, it goes down. I would feel terrible, absolutely terrible, if one of my children or grandchildren were in this group over here. But I want you to imagine what it's like. I want you to take a moment and think about what it's like if one of your children or grandchildren were down here. What can we do? Well, physical activity, exercise, and health. If we look at some of the data presented by Bill Haskell in a 1993 Wolf Lecture reported in Medicine and Science in 1994, we see that the least active or the lowest fitness levels all the way up to the most active and the very high fitness levels. If we look at risk of CHD mortality, it goes down in a variety of large cohort studies. If we look at what that might mean, if we look at something that we talk about, all of us talk about, and that's our ability to utilize oxygen, max V.O2, we see that if we're physically active throughout our lifetime, this is what happens slowly to V.O2, it goes down. On the other hand, if we start to be physically active when we're young and we maintain that physical activity as we grow older, that our functional reserve is much greater here, and it continues to be much greater out here. Now, as I look at this and I talk with people around the world, they say, you know, I'm not very physically active. I'm 40 years old. What happens if I become physically active? This is what happens. You get some of that action. You gain some of that back. But wouldn't you rather start out here than start here? Bottom line is, if you are physically active, you increase functional reserve, and increased levels of functional reserve are associated with reduced likelihood for having some kind of chronic condition. Well, let's look at that just a bit differently. Let's look at quality of life. Again, we have good health until about the age of 30, and then it begins to fall off if we're physically inactive. If we look at it, an individual who is very physically active, that good health can stay out here much longer. I just turned 68 2 weeks ago. I like to think I'm up here in this group up here. Again, if you're 45 years of age and you haven't started, can you get some of that action? And the answer is yes. Look at this. You can gain some of that action. Well, bring it to an end. Christian, you're glad to hear I'm getting close to the end. What's in the future for our children? Well, I've been around the world, and I've talked to a lot of people about their government regulations or recommendations for physical activity. They're all about the same, but they are tailored to meet the needs of the people in a particular country. And so if we look closely here, these are the United States, and certainly this is what's recommended for adults, both 150 minutes a week, twice a week at least, with some kind of strength training resistance program. But look what's recommended for children. Are our children getting that 60 minutes of more of physical activity every day? The answer is no, they're not. We're not doing the things that our children need to have done for them. As an example, Eklund in JAMA in 2012 reported on moderate to vigorous physical activity and sedentary time and cardiometabolic risk factors in children and adolescents. And very quickly, what they found is that if you look at resting insulin values, that if you were in the lowest tertile, you had the highest fasting insulin levels, which might be indicative of having are being at risk for having diabetes. But on the other hand, if you were up here in the highest tertile, that you had lower insulin levels, which might mean you were at lower risk for developing type 2 diabetes. We see the same kind of trend with fasting triglycerides, high versus low, and the good cholesterol, HDL cholesterol, happens to be low if you're physically inactive in a child. On the other hand, if you're active, it can be up in this area right here. So, I'm not putting this picture up here to make fun of kids, because kids or adults, if you're obese and be physically active, good for you. But what I'm saying is, what are we doing for our kids? What are you doing? You want them to look like this? Or you want them to be doing these things? And those overweight children can also be very physically active. So the question is, what do you want for the future of your children? What do you want for the future of your grandchildren? Do you want to be only one of those schools in the state of Illinois that's meeting the national guidelines? Or in Düsseldorf, if you're only your school where your kids are going, meet those recommendations by the German government? The question is, what are you willing to do? Well, I'm telling you, I know what you're willing to do. You wouldn't be here today. You are the choir. But we got to get down to the grassroots. We're not there. As much as we tried, this boat is going this way for 100 years. We got to bring it back around. And it takes a while to swing. It takes meetings like this for awareness to go back and change policy and change what's going on with our kids. Thank you very much.